I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Boulder Valley Board of Education for Tuesday, May 23rd, 2017. Laura, could you please call the roll?
Belval. Here. Benford. Here. Fuqua.
Here.
Garcia. Here. Gebhardt. Here. Marquis. Here. Myers.
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening and welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here. I always want to start by reminding folks that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. We'll begin, as always, with the superintendent report. Superintendent Sleeper, hello, welcome.
Good evening, President Fuqua, members of the board, staff, and community members present and watching on television. This past week, I had the privilege of attending, along with you and other cabinet members and school board members, several commencement ceremonies recognizing the achievements of more than 2,000 BVSD students. Our district is fortunate to have administrators and teachers and paraprofessionals who are committed to the highest possible academic and social development of each student. Most importantly, the Boulder Valley School District enjoys the strongest level of community support of any of the Colorado's 178 school districts. This support is reflected in our commitment of volunteer community collaboration and the consistent financial support of our taxpayers. Finally, after 12 and a half years of bi-monthly public meetings, tonight marks the end of the Briggs Gamblin era, and so I think you will join with me this evening wishing Mr. Gamblin best of luck in his new endeavors in California. So congratulations, Briggs. Thank you. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions or comments for Joe? Jenny?
Can I join Joe in congratulating Briggs? I know we just clapped, but he will be sorely missed. I'm sure that he's being replaced by a wonderful person, but there's only one Briggs, so.
And there's still 7 more days, right, of Briggs? If I need him. 5. Okay, but who's counting, right? Okay. Any other questions, comments? Tina?
No, I'll just add that I'm going to miss Briggs so much. And when I met him, I think one of the first ways that we communicated is I actually started out by asking to volunteer for him and ended up on the board instead. So I don't know if you remember that, but yeah.
Other questions, comments? All right, hearing none, we'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is public hearing and public participation. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of the schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask that persons who address the board confine your comments to matters that are germane to the business of the school district. Speakers on agenda items will be heard first, followed by those speaking to non-agenda items. Limit your presentation to 2 minutes. If we go over the first hour, public comment will continue at the end of the meeting. And recognize that students often attend or view our meetings. Speakers' remarks, therefore, should be suitable for an audience that includes kindergarten through 12th grade students. The board president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement that is unrelated to the business of the district or inappropriate for K-12 students. There's a lighting system on the podium. Turns green when your 2 minutes begins, turns yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, turns red at the end. When the light turns red, please wrap up your comments so that the board can hear from the maximum number of speakers. And I understand from our board secretary that we don't have any speakers on agenda items tonight. Is that correct, Laura? Just speakers on non-agenda items?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me find my list, and we'll get to that. Sorry. Here we go. Our first speaker on non-agenda items is Sherry Sommer. Ms. Sommer, are you with us? S-O-M-M-E-R. No? Okay. Chris Goodman. Ms. Goodman, welcome. Good evening.
I know you just heard from me before in the
okay.
special session, but I wanted to go ahead and approach you in this format as well. I hope that's okay. So I'm here today to formally request that you, as my school board team, make some advancements and changes to the current BVSD policies that are in place around the district hired coaches. These positions, I am told, are seasonal contract positions. These positions fall under different vetting than a long-term teacher hired by the district. They have the same exposure to the students as a long-term teacher, and even more so because it's in private settings. I see a clear, certain, definite need for BVSD to hire a professional consultant outside of the current district employee, HR, and legal department base to take a look at our lack of protection, both for the students and for the district. I'm extremely concerned that there is a gap in the protection of our students. We had an issue where there was inappropriate communication. When we did our research with BVSD, we found that there was no clear written policy in place. Last spring, I requested a copy or a link to the BVSD policies on coach conduct, coach communications with students, and appropriate coach behaviors within the district. I was told that these policies, quote, in writing, do not exist, that there is a district training that each coach is supposed to undergo, and that there is an expectation that the coaches should behave appropriately. There's no definition of what appropriate is written down anywhere. Last spring, I was told that BVSD would be investigating the issues we were concerned about. When I asked and proposed that the district HR department take a look at this specific situation and asked that the assistant superintendent handling my concerns please include and consider the testimony and opinions of the national court qualified expert that I had consulted with, and also that they consider the opinions of one of our school's SROs. I was told that the district does not consult outside of their own HR and legal department. This is a policy within the district that needs a second look, both for the protection of the district as a whole and most importantly for our students. This summer is a perfect time to take this action. I would like consideration from the BVSD school board to hire a nationally qualified expert to address BVSD's current coach behavior policies and to assist with updating our current policies that are in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Jason Lopez. Mr. Lopez, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for hearing me this evening. So I understand that earlier this evening, speakers shared with you concerns with the technical perspectives regarding internet safety on our elementary school campuses. I'm also very concerned about this matter and the weak internet protections in place at our elementary schools. And I'd like to share with you firsthand my personal experience and perspective with you. With no warning, I've had to have long talks with my 8-year-old daughter about the content she's viewed on the internet while utilizing BVSD computing devices such as the Chromebooks, as well as the computers installed in the campus computer lab. Specific examples include the viewing of a photographic image of a naked man with his genitalia displayed, as well as very suggestive and sexually oriented images and content. In talking with her, I have learned that these experiences have occurred unintentionally through mistyping search words, as well as intentionally when other students have intentionally searched for such content and then exposed themselves and our daughter to their search results. When I spoke with my daughter about these experiences, which occurred on a BVSD elementary school campus, she told me that viewing these images made her feel dirty. Some may argue that it's our responsibility to teach our daughter appropriate digital citizenship and responsibility. To them, I would say that our daughter did not search for such content with volition. She accidentally discovered such content or was exposed to it by other students who were intentionally seeking it. And I also ask those that would say that to consider what capacity does a 6, 7, 8-year-old child have to practice digital citizenship in this manner. They need some protections. Having shared my personal experience with you, I now ask that rather than you simply accept IT Director Moore's statement that the Palo Alto filter platform currently in place is a robust platform which meets or exceeds the Children's Internet Protection Act's requirements, you consider the search results and images yielded through the Palo Alto filtering system and honestly ask yourself if you think such images are appropriate for elementary school age children age 6 to 10. I strongly encourage you to add at the elementary school level an internet system which, rather than providing open access to internet, offers a number of vetted and improved websites and applications. As you consider this request, I ask that you view it as a serious safety concern. Children in this age range have delicate and young developing minds. Think of the mental and emotional damage that viewing such inappropriate content at such a young age will have on them now and into the future.
Thank you very much. I believe that concludes public participation. Thank you, everybody. We'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is board communication. Board members, who would like to begin? Don't be shy. Let me start by thanking you, Briggs, personally. From the time I was working at KGNU to the time I joined the board, our interactions have always been, you've been professional, you've been courteous, friendly, and prompt, and I've learned some things from working with you, so thank you for that, and I wish you the best in your retirement. Kathy? Richard, go ahead.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I want to thank Briggs, too, because Briggs, I go back a long way. I don't know how long ago we met, maybe Federico Peña days, who knows. But you've been an inspiration for me, too, so I want to thank you so much for being here in Boulder Valley School District and for all the great work you've done. Thank you so much. Getting back to the board communication piece here, I did attend also 2 graduation ceremonies, one at Peak to Peak and the other one at Centaurus High School. And again, you know, last year when I addressed the board after graduation, and one of the things that I said at that time is, as kids are being recognized for all their honors and everything that they do, I'm always in the lookout in terms of the kids that stand up when they announce sigma cum laude, et cetera, and I really didn't notice a whole lot of kids of color standing up. And that concerns me because I think that I mentioned that last year, and I know that in 1 year we can't make a whole lot of gains. And I still want to see what we can do to make sure that our kids do stand up. And then just a while ago I was talking to a person that works in one of the elementary schools, and she's here tonight, by the way, in that she teaches kids that are she teaches advanced math classes, and in her teaching of advanced math classes, she doesn't get a whole lot of Latino kids in there. So, and again, I think we need to start looking also at what can we do to upgrade our gifted and talented pool that we have beginning at the elementary level, so that our kids, when they get to high school, particularly kids of color or minority kids, are in some of these particular classes and are graduating as sigma cum laudes or engineering or attend or have AP classes under the belts and stuff like that. But again, it was a very big disappointment for me, not for what Centaurus is doing, but for me not being able to see a lot of kids of color standing up when those classes, when those groups are being asked to stand up. So just saying.
Thank you, Richard. Kathy?
I want to thank Briggs, too, for sending my little brother on the wrong path when he was his camp counselor many years ago. We've been spending all these years ever since trying to correct that path. Just kidding. But thank you, Briggs, for everything you've done. You've been a true colleague, and you've steered BVSD through many reframing issues, as Joe likes to say. So all the best to you going forward, and we'll miss you greatly, and don't be a stranger. So just a couple quick things. I was on a conference call with the lawyers from the Tabor case. The Boulder Valley School District is a plaintiff in that case. We received a very harsh opinion from a judge dismissing the case. The judge I haven't read very many opinions that are quite that harsh. And then we got an email saying whether we wanted to continue. So at some point I think we should have that discussion. But it's been a long road, and I personally don't see any reason to abandon it right now, but I just wanted to let you all know that I had participated in that call. Not a whole lot of people are on the call, but we are well represented by David Skaggs in that litigation. So just wanted to bring that up. I went to the planning meeting for the Arapahoe 50th anniversary that's coming up in August, and I'm looking forward to that and getting everybody that we can to participate in that, and our revisioning of the Career Tech program there and the celebration of Career Tech, and it's hard to believe it's been there already 50 years, but it's been fun to be able to participate in helping to plan that. And then a couple of graduations just helped me appreciate the diversity of our school district. To go from Netherlands graduation, which was wonderful, and they managed to get the snow out of the parking lot, and you know, the the rural feel of Nederland and the closeness of that community was just great. And to go from that, from 30 or some graduates to Fairview's 460 kids was just makes you appreciate all of the great work and the diversity that this school district is handling, and I think is doing as good a job as we can. We can always improve, but it's just such a great thing. It's such an honor to be able to be up there and hand out diplomas. I talked with Tom a little about it. Some of the kids who are still like deer in headlights, even though they're at the end of the line and 50-some kids have gone in front of them, they don't know where to go and they don't know what to do, and it's just really fun to see them. So I really appreciated being invited and having that opportunity.
Thanks, Kathy. Other comments? Shelley?
Briggs, again, I want to thank you. You've been with us through thick and thin, and especially your legislative, wisdom and input has been really helpful to me over the years. And I wish you all the success and happiness that you deserve, and that's all of it. So thank you so much for everything you've done for the district. Appreciate it. Wanted to say that I went to Boulder High's graduation, which turned out to be a beautiful day after that snowstorm. The custodians were out all night shoveling the field off, and it was a picture-perfect day. And I'm not sure I've ever talked about this because I've done Boulder High's graduation, I think, every year since I've been here. But I love the way they pick their speakers. It's not the kids with the highest grade points. It's not the president of student council. It's kids who feel like they have something to say. And Boulder High looks at those kids and picks, a handful of them. And every year, it's just such a tearjerker. I mean, these kids have overcome such incredible obstacles, and there was one talk that I was just like, okay, I'm in front of 1,000 people. I'm not going to start sobbing, but that's how moving it was. So it was a great graduation, great kids. So, and then I'd like to just say thank you to Chris Goodman for coming forward about the coach hiring. It's very timely because I've been asking for a review of athletic policies in the district for quite a while now, and we've just had so many important things to deal with. It hasn't really come to the top of the list, but just last week, the board agreed that we're going to take a look at some of this. Yeah, so it's very timely. Yeah, so, well, I have your name and number here, so we are going to be forming a working group, and I may reach out to you. So thanks again. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Shelley. Tom?
So Briggs, I get to say my piece here. It's been great working with you, and you're a true professional at your job. I wish you all the best. When I was elected to my first term on this board, Briggs was one of the first people that contacted me. And we chatted about the school district and what was going to happen and so on. And I asked Briggs, I said, Briggs, can you get me a copy of the strategic plan? You remember that? And he said, well, we don't have one. And so then began a long journey of getting a strategic plan in place, which we have these days. So it's been great knowing you. I hope we stay in touch, and good luck on what you endeavor. I also attended graduations. I attended Monarch graduation, which I have every year. I've been on the school board, and it was bittersweet for a number of reasons. One is it's my last graduation to do, so I've done 8 there now, and since I'm going off my second term. And it also is Jerry Anderson's last graduation at Monarch, since she has decided to move on to future jobs. But it's always a joy to see the seniors as they graduate, to see the parents and grandparents and friends. There's such a joy and excitement around, and atmosphere and hope and ambition of our students as they go forward. It reminds me of what we're really here for on this board.
Thanks, Tom. Jenny?
So first of all, I'd like to thank the parents that came out and discussed. I see some of them in the audience now who came to give feedback on our budget. We have a really tight budget, and everything that people spoke in favor of were things that that we, there's probably a real need for, and we'll do our best to make it work. And we're getting to the end of a long process where we've had a number of, groups looking at some of those needs, and I trust we'll, make wise decisions as a board, but we always appreciate the public's input on that. Okay, and then I'm hoping we'll get some information more about how we're protecting kids from some of the things we've heard about on the internet. I mean, some of the problems with the internet. Maybe we could get an update on that or something, and maybe we can even add it to a future agenda.
Yeah, Andrew Moore's out of town right now, but he forwarded me some of these communications earlier this week that were coming to the forefront to bring me up to speed on some of the concerns that are out there. So I think he's preparing himself to address the board.
Okay, good. That would be important, I think. And then I, too, went to a couple of graduations, and they're graduations I also have attended every year since I've been on the board, and I'd like to say, first of all, I went to Broomfield High School's graduation, which is a graduation that's near and dear to my heart because that's where my own kids graduated, and I always love it, and I especially love it now that we do it indoors. With plenty of seating for everybody, and it was terrific, as it always is. And I always feel when I see those kids walking across the stage that if that's our future is in good hands. There could stand to be a little maturity, but mostly. Mostly, we're in good hands. And I will just share with the board one of the traditions at Broomfield High School that I think is a little unique to Broomfield High School, but which I really love, which is the tradition of the roses. And they hand out roses to it used to be moms, but now they've realized that parents come in both genders. And so they now hand out a rose to an adult representative of every graduate's family as a way of thanking those family members for also supporting the students through 12 years of school. And I think it's just a nice way to recognize that nobody gets through childhood alone, and that we as a school can't, don't need the support of families as well. So I really like that tradition. And then I also attended Boulder Prep's graduation, and as most of you know, I think Boulder Prep is a school that serves mostly at-risk students, and so to see those students graduating every year, it never fails to move me. And I have had people say to me, isn't it wonderful we provide that service for kids? But I have to say, it's not us doing the work. When those kids graduate from high school, they are the heroes of their own lives. And I just, they have overcome, many of them, so many difficulties that I am struck with admiration. And I am sure that the fact that they've made it so far is a good indication that they're going to be going places too. And I'm always struck by how bright and talented they are. So I always love that graduation as well, and I'm going to miss that one next year as well. Anyway, that's all I have.
Well, thanks, Jenny. Any other comments, board members? Kathy?
I just want to echo what Jenny said about following up on some of the comments we've received about the internet safety, and to thank the Lopez's for coming and bringing that to our attention, and we'll look forward to a follow-up on that. And echo Jenny's thanks to the other parents. Some of you are still here who came and spoke to the budget session. So as Jenny has said, we're doing our best to balance what we can in a system that has some significant financial struggles. We're very lucky in Boulder because our voters have been supportive of our efforts to procure additional funding, but it's still not enough. But thanks to all the parents for coming and helping us understand what the issues and concerns are out there. So thank you.
Thanks, Kathy, and I would second that. And congratulations, graduates and family members who helped them get there. I think with that, we will conclude board communication, move to the next item on our agenda, which is an information item on the superintendent search. As most of you know, we're looking for a long-term interim superintendent and then, of course, a permanent superintendent to lead the district. So we reached out to the Colorado Association of School Boards, CASB, which I think most people in this room know, but if you're watching at home, this is the group that for, over 70 years, right? Ken has been supporting school districts large and small, over 170 districts with the myriad of issues that we deal with. And so we asked Ken DeLay, the executive director of CASB, to come and offer some remarks and have a brief conversation with the board about superintendent searches. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would be remiss if since I'm here, didn't also say a nice word or two about Briggs. He has, what I would say is, over the years, he has given unstintingly of his time and his expertise, and I might add his good humor at state events, many of which we have sponsored, and we're gonna miss that presence and that insight. So, Godspeed, and thanks for all you've done over the years, not just in this district, but for the state. I'll make a couple of comments, but really I'm just here if there's questions or comments, I'm happy to try and take them. As I think everybody in the room knows, and certainly the board, you're in the process of trying to select initially an interim superintendent to serve 6 months to a year, and during that time, as I understand it, you're going to initiate a search for and retain a permanent long-term superintendent candidate. I think it's a little bit important to think about those two as different processes, particularly when you're a district, as Boulder is, very late in the search season. It's not really possible to conduct a long-term search this late in the season. So you think about reaching out for an interim. When we think about an interim, we think about 2 or 3 different things. We think about somebody who can come in and immediately take the reins of a district, whatever the district may be, and be effective and keep the trains running on time and hopefully connect with the community that's there. We think of somebody, and I think it's especially important in this case, who's going to have some credibility with the community, the broader community. Boulder Valley's case, that probably starts with Chalkbeat and goes all the way down to your students and parents, your staff, et cetera. So that level of credibility. And somebody that is ready, based on experience and background, to take that step. When your chairman called me, we spent a little bit of time internally thinking about candidates and really developed a list of maybe 18, 20 folks. And I think in some conversations internally and with the board narrowed that down to a much smaller number. But I think you are blessed with an opportunity probably to get somebody that can really step in and do a great job in this district in the short term that they're going to be here. We also think with an interim, you don't want somebody who's going to be a candidate for the long-term job. There are a lot of different reasons for that, but clarity around that issue, I think, is important. There are exceptions to that rule, but one of the things that happens with a long-term search for a long-term superintendent is you need a public process. You need an opportunity to sit down and meet with the community, talk to the community, think about what they think you need as a leader. When we do a search, we engage with that process. We do some surveys and some focus groups. We bring that information back to the board, sit down with the board and talk about, okay, here's what the community wants, here's what your staff wants. What does the board think? And to develop a profile that can be used in soliciting applicants so that when you get applicants, they are responding to a very clear and specific profile that the community and the board has developed. And then you've got an opportunity at some point, in our view, to meet with maybe 3 of those folks as finalists and make a very public and transparent decision about who you'd like. So I think those are things that you can't really do when you're trying to make an immediate hire. And I think creating an opportunity to do that is important. So with that, I'm going to stop and answer questions.
Thank you, Ken. Questions for Ken DeLay?
If you have any.
From CASB, if you have any. Tina? Yes, of course.
So just as a process, how does the board talk about candidates, and how do we introduce candidates in this case to the community?
Are we talking about
The interim.
Interim.
Yeah.
Again, you can have you can think about that differently. I think it's not untypical in an interim search for the board, because it's just a 1 year or very often less than 1 year position. It's very often a decision that has to be made very quickly. For the board to settle on one quote-unquote finalist and then introduce that candidate to the community, and with the couple of weeks to sort of kick the name around and let that person introduce themselves if that's necessary, and think about, is this a good choice or not, before you finalize the decision. But you can do it differently, but and we are strong advocates when you're doing a search for a long-term superintendent to be very transparent and public about it, and to have multiple finalists just so that you've got a lot of involvement. But with the interim, you've got a little different challenge. You're really looking for somebody that the board feels strongly the board can work with immediately, that the board feels strongly can walk into the district and, as I said a minute ago, not only be instantly credible, but have the background and the experience to really take over the reins and move the district forward over the course of the year without making any major policy shifts, probably. Just really, we're going to stabilize things and move forward effectively while we do that long-term search.
And so if we chose to speak with a few candidates, is that something that we can do in an executive session, or what is the public piece to that, and also just knowing who the names are that we might be considering?
I think that the public requirement is that when you get to finalists, you need to make those names public. And you will find, even with long-term searches, that some search firms will recommend that the board go through the interviews in executive session and land on one finalist. I do not recommend that. I think you can do it if you choose to for a long-term superintendent. For an interim, particularly when you've got a short time frame, and if you feel pretty good about the candidate or candidates that you have, I think making that decision that we're going to go with one finalist and get to the decision quickly and move forward is appropriate.
Thank you.
Other questions? Kathy?
I just want to thank you, Ken, for coming up and helping us kind of navigate our way through this and helping make such a clear distinction between looking for an interim, looking for the long term, because two of us are at least new to this, Richard and I, and so having that guidance from you, and I appreciate you coming up and giving that to us, so thank you for your assistance on this.
Well, I appreciate being here. I was telling Lori before the meeting that first time I came to one of the board meeting at Boulder Valley, I was still practicing law, and I was independent counsel for a personnel matter, and my agenda item came up at 12:30. So when Chairman Sam asked me to come this evening, I thought, well, I hope they're a little more efficient tonight. But I would just say, as an aside, that really all kudos to this board for navigating. You're the navigators, and a kind of a little bit of a rocky stretch, and I think you're doing a good job of navigating. So kudos to you, and I'm happy to do whatever we can.
Thanks, Ken. And I have a question about the permanent search. And when we talk about involving stakeholders, of course, I immediately think of our many important internal groups, the various employee
Yes.
groups. I think of parents.
Yes.
I think of community partners.
Yes.
Who am I missing there? Or is that?
Well, I think those are a lot of the groups. I think that certainly your employee groups are important. I think parents are important. I think that larger business community, if you can pull that together, is important. I think Boulder Valley is a little bit of a unique district, not completely unique. You share this with a number of other districts, but you have multiple communities. You were all just talking about the graduations you've been to: Netherland, Bloomfield, Monarch, Fairview, Boulder High. I mean, these are all very, very different communities, and part of what we think about when we're doing that kind of an engagement is making sure that you hear not just from Boulder proper, but from all of the communities in the school district. That is a conversation we would typically have with the board before we even started those conversations. Here's who we would think about. Are we missing somebody? Are there somebody you think we should talk to? Because I think, again, it's the board's call at the end of the day to say, this is the profile we want. This is the kind of superintendent we'd like to have. But it's important that you hear from all of those groups. It's important that you have a good understanding of what the expectations of all your communities are when you make those decisions.
Thank you. Other questions for Ken? Richard?
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Richard. Good to see you again.
Same here. It seems like a pretty involved process for the long-term superintendent. Where would you start? I mean, like right now, you say it's too late for us to do an independent or a search for a long-term superintendent. So what would be the timeline? What would you?
Well, you can make that call. I think for a district like Boulder, starting sometime mid to late fall is a good bet. It gives you the opportunity to do all the engagement you want with the community and to get the position posted late in the year or early in the next calendar year. And it gives people, and you're going to have candidates from around the country in all probability. In fact, I'm quite sure you will. And the thing about really outstanding superintendents, and you want an outstanding superintendent, is they will not leave their existing district without an opportunity to make sure that the district's got a chance to replace them with somebody. And so if you get started early, you can have a time schedule that will permit that. If you were to try and hire somebody now, you would be asking someone to leave another district in a lurch, so to speak. So I think that our experience over the years has been starting sometime mid to late fall is a really good bet for any search, but especially for a larger school district.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions? If not, Ken, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for your recommendations on this matter and for all the help you've given the Boulder Valley, you and CASB, and every school district in the state. We appreciate it.
Happy to be here, and best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is action items consent grouping. I am required to read them. 7.1, personnel items. 7.2, approval of minutes, May 5th, 2017 special meeting. 7.3, approval of minutes, May 8th, 2017 special meeting. 7.4, approval of minutes, May 9th, 2017 special meeting. 7.5, approval of minutes, May 9th, 2017 regular meeting. 7.6, approval of minutes, May 11th, 2017 special meeting. 7.7, approval of minutes, May 12, 2017, special meeting. 7.8, approval of minutes, May 16, 2017, special meeting. 7.9, approval of minutes, May 17, 2017, special meeting. 7.10, acceptance of donation, Flatirons Elementary. 7.11, addendum to agreement between BVSD and Teens, Inc. 7.12, change order to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond-funded improvement work at Broomfield High School. 7.13, ELD materials adoption. 7.14, non-renewal of contracts. 7.17, ratification of meet and confer process between the Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley District Leadership Team, professional technical employees, and non-represented employees. 7.16, ratification of the negotiated agreement between the Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley Education Association. And 7.17, to authorize a resolution to accept bids and authorize construction and maintenance project contracts during July 2017. Are there any items board members would like to pull from the consent agenda? Tom?
Yes, I'd like to pull 7.15.
7.15, ratification of meet and confer process between the Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley District Leadership Team, professional technical employees, and non-represented employees is pulled. Any other items board members would like to pull? Hearing none, I need a motion to approve the remaining items on the consent agenda. Motion from Kathy, second from Shelley. Is there discussion of the remaining items on the consent agenda? Tina?
Yeah, and this is just out of curiosity. For the Teens, Inc., or the program, which I think we also sometimes refer to as Chinook, What do we call that? Because it seems to, it's almost like it's a school, but it's a service we're contracting, so it's not a charter, it's not a, like, what is that type of provider called?
For educational services.
And it meets all the education of the kids, right? It's a, they're
Right,
full,
and
they're not
Mark
served
might
by-
be the person that can talk more in detail about the programming itself, but it falls within Netherland High School.
Okay, so it's, because I know it says that the principal of Netherland meets with them once a month to go over what's going on. So is it, do they sit in Netherland, or are they in a separate building?
They're in a separate location.
Okay. I- yeah.
So the Teens Inc. program is akin to an alternative high school campus, and so they do feed. They're part of the Netherland Middle School, High School student count, but they serve alternative students, and so they would also draw from other areas like Gilpin County, et cetera. But the FTE or the credit is given to Netherland Middle School, High School, and then we have an agreement in terms of funding them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Oh, yeah, additional question, Shelley?
All Mark's there. I noticed that in the information we were given, there was an update to the number of students that were going to be included in the program, but there wasn't an update to current cost.
So it remains the same. So everything within the contract is the same, with the exception of the student count, which we've raised to 30. Typically, they've got a fairly fluid in and out of students, and whenever they go above their cap of what we've allowed them, they need special permission. So we get credit for the students in our October count, so that's counted, and so 30 was a reasonable number. That's usually where they are. They've never really settled above 30, but usually they're in the upper 20s.
Mm-hmm. Do we provide additional services to those kids beyond just the teens program, the district?
No, there's some shared service agreement through like social emotional learning and counseling services where they may, work with Netherland, but by and large they're completely self-sufficient, and they operate in a lot of grants that they apply for separately.
Okay. So do you know if the program's ever been evaluated for effectiveness in any way?
We have I don't really oversee them, but I meet with Steve, who's the principal there. We usually meet 2 or 3 times a year. They have their own board and their own oversight. So there's no direct program evaluation, but we do have some graduation rates data statistics that we can certainly share.
It says it goes through an accreditation process.
Yeah, that advanced ED accreditation, but I guess I don't know what that is either, so.
Not sure.
Got a little more information, RFI on that?
Yeah, it just seems like if we're funding it at this rate, it's over $6,000 per student, it would be nice to have some evaluation information.
We can follow up with some additional information about their accreditation and some other data statistics.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Other questions about items on consent? Hearing none, Laura, could you please call the vote on the consent agenda? Oh, Shelley has another question. Hang on. That's all right.
On the ELD materials adoption, that's on there, right?
Yep.
7.13. So I'm just wondering, how would adopting these materials sync with any sort of structured literacy program that we might adopt across the district? Would this be compatible with that or different
I'm
than
going
that?
to defer for the detailed questions on this to Dr. Cabrera.
Sure, yeah. It just seems since we haven't made that decision yet, it would be nice to know that these two are, whatever we decide, it's going to be in sync.
I think it's a reasonable question, Shelley. I'm not sure that these entirely would be aligned in that same sort of manner. I think what we have would say that what we have for our other materials adoption, have materials that are being put together that would address kids in terms of language development as well as, literacy issues in general. What we do know, and actually we've known this for a number of years, is that we have virtually no consistent newcomer materials in our schools. And so we've been at deficit for some time, mostly a result because of funding issues. I think you probably saw the note that Mrs. Marcus raised regarding the Ed Northwest audit. Well, that was not brand new news to us. So we're really trying to remedy this part first. I think complemented with the other of our materials adoption in the budget, the two would come together.
Anything else? Shelley? No? Okay. Other questions? If not, I think, are we ready for the vote then on the consent agenda? Laura, please call the vote.
Belval. Yes. Benford.
Yes.
Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
Yes.
Marquis. Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, next item is the action item on those pulled from the consent grouping. Tom, you pulled 7.15, ratification of meet and confer process between the Boulder Valley School District and the Boulder Valley District Leadership Team, professional technical employees, and non-represented employees.
Thank you, Sam. I move that we table this action until the next regular board meeting or at a later time determined by the agenda setting committee.
The motion, I believe it needs a second. Is that right, Melissa? A second from Shelley. Discussion? Why would you like to do that, Tom?
So this, first of all, it's not about giving cost of living increases to our employees. That's not what it's about at all. Recently, the board has come upon information that the BVSD District Leadership Team Professional Technical Terms of Conditions Employment Handbook, which includes benefits, compensation, leave, and so on and so forth, that's in effect was never approved by the Board of Education. Per our policy, policy GCB, it says administrator compensation plans and benefits shall be determined by board action. And so that has not happened. So it seems improper to me that we would vote an increase on a compensation plan that has never been approved by the board. So we need some time to go back and take a look at this and take whatever action we need to do to put that in place and approve it. And then we'll be able to go forward with a appropriate COLAs that are related to that particular salary schedule.
Other questions, comments? Shelley?
Yeah.
And then Jenny.
Apart from the policy issue, the reason I would want to table this for maybe till the next meeting or so is because this has budget implications that need to be weighed against other budget priorities as well. So it feels like we ought to talk about that all at once, not approve a piece of it in advance of having that discussion. So that's why I would want it tabled.
Okay. Jenny?
So I'm a little puzzled by Tom's first remark because, well, I haven't really had an opportunity. I didn't know we were going to be talking in great detail about this tonight. But it seems to me like we approve their salary schedule every year that we've given our employees a COLA. We've given all our employees a COLA, including this group of employees. And I don't. So I think that we probably have approved as a board their salary schedules in the past, and I also am not really comfortable with singling out one particular group of employees and withholding a raise from them when we're giving all of our other employees COLA raises. So that.
Okay.
Can I respond to that, Sam?
Yeah.
Jenny, I don't know if you're responding to me or to who, but was not my intent to withhold the raise or.
Yeah.
It's just to look at it as as the whole picture with the budget, not to necessarily make any changes to what's being asked, but just lay it up next to other considerations.
So why is that different than our other employee groups?
Well, BVEA has their own contract. I mean, it's not up until 2018. This is something we approve every year.
But
So that's why it's different.
we've approved BVEA's COLA this year as well.
Right.
And we've also approved our other
I didn't say I
classified
wasn't going to
staff.
approve COLA. I don't know why you're going to that.
But I just don't know why we would single them out when we haven't singled out our other employee groups. I guess that's just what I don't understand, why single out this group.
Tom?
So I'd like to answer that. It's not that we're singling them out. It's that all the other employees have contracts that we have approved. This is a set of salary and compensation that we have not approved. And I've confirmed with our legal team that the board did not approve it. By policy, it has to be approved. So if we're going to base a cost of living increase on a salary schedule we haven't approved by policy, then that's improper in my opinion. That's why I'd like to table it until we go through, figure out what we're going to do, make the appropriate approval of the compensation plan as the board is supposed to do by policy, and then we can follow the correct procedure of doing the COLA increase.
Jenny, and then Tina?
So now I'm confused. So Melissa, you've confirmed that we never approved compensation for our administrative staff for this group of employees? That's, well.
I think there.
I think there's, so I was going to ask which legal team is he referring to? We have a couple now.
Right.
I don't know that is there anything about legal advice here other than it hasn't been approved, and that is my understanding. So if we need to go back and figure that out, then let's take 2 weeks and go back and figure it out. I went back to our board docs last year. In fact, the whole time the board docs has been in use by this district, I did a search and was not able to find any agenda item on this. These things are typically done on a yearly basis, and you know, it may have been some time ago that we did this, but I have not been able to find anything that the board approved. And if nothing else, we could take this period of time to figure that out, if that is indeed true.
And when you mentioned council, you're referring to district council?
I think probably I shouldn't say,
okay.
But we may want to take this up in a different session.
Okay, so the motion is to pull it for now?
Motion is to table it
for now.
For 2 weeks, or at a later time determined by the agenda setting process.
And the information specifically that would be gathered during this period of potential delayed action on it would be?
To determine if and when it was approved. If it was not approved, then what we need to do to go forward to approve that document, so then we can enact a COLA based upon that document.
Okay. Other discussion? Questions? Kathy?
This just feels like the wrong timing, Tom. If we have an issue, we should fix it going forward, but we shouldn't fix this trying to go backwards. And so to bring it up, pulling it off consent without the appropriate conversations just doesn't feel right. If we have an issue, we should solve it going forward, but I feel like we're holding this up, and if it was something the board should have done when I was on the board or before, we should fix it, but we shouldn't make this the vehicle for doing it.
Yeah, and I'm not proposing us holding it up. I'm proposing going forward, we approve it before the budget is approved, and we have time to do that.
Tina?
Yeah, I don't think we really have time, given what I'm looking at our calendar and what's on our agenda and the other things that we have to deal with. I don't think we have the time to do this in depth, and I don't think it's appropriate to be calling this into question 4 months before we need to approve, 1 month before we need to approve the budget. So I wish you had brought this up 5 months ago, and so I'm not in favor of this resolution.
Yeah, I wish I had known about it 5 months ago. We just have found this out in the last couple of weeks.
Shelley?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't aware of it until very recently, and I think that waiting a couple weeks to understand what needed to have gone on is, to me, not a problem at all. And if there are several board members who, think that that's the right thing to do, I'm in support of that. I mean, it's not going to change anything. It's not going to delay the budget. It's simply another, it gives us some time to look into what process we should have maybe used, or whether we did it right and we just didn't know we did it right because we can't find that in board docs. I just think it's worth making sure that all our ducks in a row before we move forward. And it doesn't say anything about changing the numbers on the page. It's just about the process.
And Tom, can you frame those questions in an RFI, should this motion pass?
I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Any other discussion on this? Kathy?
Is there a reason an RFI wasn't sent at the time you discovered this and you waited until now?
I did talk to this whole board about it.
Okay, other questions, comments? No? Jenny?
Yeah, just one quick one, which is, it seems to me like if this is an outstanding question, I agree with Kathy. We can fix it going forward regardless of the action we take tonight, and I would suggest an RFI in any case, so.
All right, any further discussion? Richard?
Yeah, just if it's the public policy or the employee handbook, the issue, is it possible to go ahead and approve this, but then go back and take a look at the employee handbook? I mean, why could, because I think that's the issue.
When I look at the
Tom?
employee handbook, it has the salary schedules. And we're basing a COLA of a percentage on those salary schedules. So that's why I would like to, not, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. Let's take care of that first and then go forward. I think that can be done in a short period of time.
Kathy?
Hasn't the board ratified those salary schedules before?
Yeah, well, that's what we're saying. We didn't ratify the last one. The one that this is based on was not ratified.
Every year they get ratified.
But we didn't do it. That's what we're saying. There's no evidence that we did it. It somehow got put in effect without us taking board action on it.
Melissa Barber, could that have happened potentially?
I don't recall that, but I would need to do some research.
Okay.
And I think that's all we're asking for, time to do a little bit of research. It's not going to set the budget back.
And bring it back on the 13th potentially.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, Laura, could you please restate the motion and then call the vote?
The motion is to table item 7.15, which has been moved to action, for 2 weeks until the next regular board meeting or until a later time determined by the agenda setting process.
Does that reflect your motion, Tom? All right, will you please call the vote?
Belval.
No.
Benford.
Yes.
Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
No.
Marquis.
No.
Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, Tom, if you could put the questions in the form of an RFI, and we'll bring that back on the 13th.
I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're moving now to our study item, which is 9.1, 2017-18 proposed budget. Joe Sleeper, do you need to set this up, Superintendent Sleeper? Or should we just turn directly to Bill Sutter, who is already at the podium? I guess we'll turn directly to Bill.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Take just a moment to load up this PowerPoint.
Sam, can I just say a couple of things
Sure.
before we get into the budget? There's a couple of items on that budget that may be discussed tonight, and if it is discussed tonight, I want to recuse myself from that.
Okay.
And that's the Paso and the El Paso budget line items.
Thank you, Richard. Take it away, Mr. Sutter.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is both a presentation of the proposed budget for the 2017-18 fiscal year, as well as a discussion of the changes since the last time we met and discussed the budget. So an update, not a review of everything that we've done up to this point. First off, one quick review of the priorities that have been included in the budget development process. These are the priorities that we've been working on since we started several months ago. Maintaining program services and support, adding classroom teachers for student growth, employee contracts, the retirement, para-retirement, health and dental, social emotional learning, equity in supporting targeted populations, and building maintenance and operations. This is a summary of the resources that are included in the proposed budget. So we have the preliminary budget. Typically, we've been talking the last few meetings about just the change from the total budget. What we've included here in the preliminary budget is the total budget. So this is talking about all $300+ million that we're working with here in the general operating fund. Then we have an identification of the changes since the last time we met, and then what is included in the proposed budget document that is attached to the agenda item. We do have hard copies if anybody wants one, so let me know. So here I've highlighted. Oh. At this immediate moment. Okay, you can't ask me any questions on. Oh, no, that's your only copy. No, it's already. Okay, all right. Thank you. No worries. No. This is just a summary of what's been happening. So on the resources side, these two highlighted items, the changes, again, since we last talked. This is our total $320 million worth of revenue. The beginning balance side, when we last talked, we had netted out the reserves from what was available, so the $8.5 million of fund balance that we're expecting to have available at the end of this fiscal year to carry forward into next year. We netted out reserves from that so that it wouldn't confuse the issue of how much is actually available to spend. So we've put that back in because the whole budget has to add up, so we've included that in the total. Then we have an increase in revenue, so this is $2.4 million. So specific ownership tax, we had continued to review the revenue line items in the district. Specific ownership tax, which is car registrations, is broken up into two items. One is equalized and one is non-equalized. The equalized specific ownership tax is a portion of the Total School Finance Act, so that is determined by the state. On the non-equalized side, which is the amount that we get to keep in the district, we went through that and looked at projections and reviewed how things had happened this year. And so we've increased that revenue into the district. And then, of course, there was lots of discussion on the last-minute changes to the School Finance Act down in the legislature, where the increased per-pupil revenue was included at the full 2.8% of the consumer price index for the Denver, Boulder, Greeley area. So no increase in the negative factor there. So those are the two major changes on the revenue side since we last spoke. Next, we have the expenditure side. So again, general operating fund. We'll highlight a couple of changes here. So with the increase in the per pupil revenue from 2.48% when there was an increase in the negative factor included to 2.8%, so there's a commensurate increase in cost of living adjustment for staff. There is a reorganization, those first two lines, you can see the repeated description there, out of district to tuition. So when we place a student in an out-of-district facility, we pay tuition to that. So there's some fluidity between staff, district staff, and what we pay to outside facilities. So this is just a reorg between the purchase service for those, that tuition for special ed students that are placed in outside facilities. So again, the increase was $800,000 on the COLA side to increase it to that 2.8%, and then a reduction in staff and an increase in those purchase services. Next, we have our transfers, reserves, and ending balance. I'm going to highlight a few items here. So with the increase in per pupil revenue, of course, a portion of that needs to transfer over to charter schools, so that has been included here. As well as the funding needed to transfer to other funds for that COLA adjustment, so some dollar amounts going to other funds related to that expected COLA. Then what we have down here in the bottom right-hand corner are those funds available to be spent. So we have about $600,000 in ongoing resources that can be allocated to a particular budget item or several budget items.
And then the $1.9 million ending balance that is one-time resources, that is made up of the $1 million that we identified back in the preliminary budget of sort of rainy day ending balance, set it aside. And then there's also $900,000 over and above that that is able to be allocated or not, or again, add to that ending balance amount. Some possible budget adjustments that have been discussed at length over the last few months. Additional supports for students with dyslexic characteristics. Additional investment in elementary social emotional supports. So we've talked about that phase in for the social emotional supports at the elementary level. There is the opportunity to increase that phase in or shorten the time to phase that in. Additional investment in textbooks and learning materials. We have a deficit in the ongoing resources needed for learning materials. We are funding quite a bit with one-time money as proposed in this budget, but there is a need for ongoing resources in textbooks and learning materials. Additional investment in common assessments. There is a rollout schedule, I believe the RFI was shared, that sort of details when and what common assessments are rolling out. Additional resources could speed that up. And then also, as I mentioned, increasing fund balance for economic or expenditure uncertainty. Next steps, so we have incorporating the approved budget adjustments to include within the budget. We have a budget work session set aside for May 30th, that's next week. Then we have June 13th scheduled for budget adoption. Then September, November, December, and January, the sort of rolling into the revised budget process. We have our year-end balances, knowing where we ended up the year, carryover, one-time resources. The October student count doesn't actually get finalized until November. Then in December, we have our certification of mill levies, and in January, the deadline for having a revised budget. So, the end.
Thank you, Bill. Questions, Tina?
Yeah, Bill, thanks so much. So the total ending balance right now is 2.5 million?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So does that include, so how much of that, or is that separate from our teacher reserve for last minute adjustments to
Yes.
class?
Separate.
So how much is in that?
We've allocated about 500,000 of that 1.5 million that was originally set aside. So there's about $1 million left.
Okay, so we have $1 million that's not part of this 2.5 million for the teacher. And how much did we use last year, more or less? Or actually, we were short of kids last year, right?
We did come up short. In the revised budget process, we used one-time resources to address some of the staffing challenges that happened last year. So last year was a bit of an anomaly from what we tend to expect.
Okay, and then did we end up including increased custodial support to maintain the new?
Correct, that 500,000 that was identified in the preliminary budget as we discussed.
Okay, and then when we think about the considerations on that slide, could we put Paso and El Paso on that? Because it, just from the board's perspective, even though the process was different for it getting into the budget book, I think the discussion would be in that grouping, if that's possible.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. Other questions, comments? Shelley?
So, going through the book, Bill, and thanks again for the massive effort that it takes to do this. I noticed that there, and I didn't note the page, but there is a category called budget items not approved.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about? So it says over $15 million of additional funding requests were not approved after solicitation from district leadership and staff from schools and departments. So I'm not sure who you're referring to as having approved or not approved these. I thought all these things were, I thought everything was still under discussion here. I mean, at no point did the board say, oh, we're throwing out differentiated classroom funding, or we're throwing out elementary level social emotional support counselors. In fact, that's been a topic that we keep discussing over and over again about how to get that in there if possible. So can you say more about how these got pulled out and labeled not approved? I said I didn't remember the page. Maybe Bill knows the page.
87. No, I'm not going to take it.
It's buried in this package somewhere. I'll see if I can find it.
It should be in the executive summary in the section 1, introductory section in there somewhere. That is a requirement to include that in the budget awards that we submit for, to include things that were requested but not funded. That's something we've had in there for a long time, from school buses to maintenance support, class size, adjustments. So there's a lot of things that are typical and perpetual inclusions. From that list, so with the elementary social emotional supports, the total amount being plus or minus $3.5 million, and the current inclusion of about $1 million. So that delta is the kind of thing that was included as not funded. The total request for, or the, not necessarily a request, but the report from the student-based resource allocation, $1.5 million for 3 separate tiers, that being included as the total. So again, it's those things that are discussed and put out there, but certainly we don't have the opportunity to fund all those items.
So then, given that that's the methodology, why wouldn't we see the differential between what's been asked for dyslexia and what is labeled as being given to dyslexia here? Wouldn't you expect to see at least a $700,000 differential?
The proposal that you submitted, I mean, it was an email that came from you to the board, was never really brought forward in any other method other than that. It was discussed internally, but it was not part of the budget development process. So it's certainly out there as an item. We included it as additional supports, but it's not a specific request that came through the channels that we did.
Were most of those requests internal requests, or would it include an external organization or community partner?
It included the PASO and El Paso.
The ones that were not funded?
No. As far as the internal process where we collected requests and processed items. So that's all. Those are the only external items with those PASO and El Paso.
Okay, but and it wouldn't include community or people coming to the board or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
Tom?
Yeah, so Bill, could you describe for me then the internal process of bringing forward these budget requests? I guess I'm not familiar with that. I know that the board has a number of work sessions and various board members have requested things such as common assessments and so on and so forth. So I don't understand the internal process for bringing forth these budget requests.
So budget requests were solicited by the superintendent and brought forward to the superintendent and run through cabinet. We discussed them in cabinet in several meetings, and through that with the priorities that were put in place and at least supported by a majority of the board, that's what sort of brought together the total budget.
Could I follow up? I'll submit an RFI, Joe, but I would like to see the budget request by cabinets that came in as part of this process.
Yeah.
Shelley?
Yeah. Bill, I'm just really unclear why an outside request for funding would make it through the process and make it to the list, whereas a discussion we've been having for 2 years where a board member made that request, as well as over 100 community members, why that wouldn't make the list. Because we as a board didn't agree to this outside request, and maybe, and I know it is a great program, but it's not something we ever discussed. So how is it that programs we have discussed for a couple of years haven't made it, including counselors, for example? I don't understand the process either.
So it is the budget that is put together as we have been discussing for several months, and the opportunity for specific items to be added to the budget and very specifically added. Those opportunities have existed. Again, seeking direction from the board is what we have been asking for to include items. So.
Yeah, I appreciate the process questions, but we do have dollar figures in front of us for specific programs, and we're getting near the finish line, so it's important that we try to give direction on this, modest amount of available funds and where a majority of the board wants to allocate them. Jenny, and then you have something else, Shelley?
Yeah.
Okay.
I share Shelley's concern about the inclusion of items from outside community organizations. I think that, I've heard that they're wonderful programs, but they haven't gone through the process that I would expect. For example, some of the other items that have been on the budget for the one-time expenditures, we had board presentations, we had committees working on them, and then we had board presentations, and we had opportunities to discuss them and weigh in on them as a board. And I believe that those particular outside community requests should probably wait to be included in the budget until we've had an opportunity to go through a similar process with them.
We can follow up more discussion on that at our work session next week as well. Are there other, Shelley, go ahead.
Yeah, well, we just, we heard testimony again tonight that what's included in here for our dyslexic students and actually all other students who have reading issues is really not enough to create the kind of comprehensive program that's going to be successful. So once again, I would like that program fully funded at $1.2 million. And I believe, if I recall back to the budget, only $200,000 or $300,000 of that is ongoing expense, and about $1 million or a little less than $1 million is one-time funding, which we have the money to support. And I think I'd like to see that in the budget.
Shelley, Kathy?
Yeah, so on the slide that had the different priorities on it, did staff, so we have more money than we anticipated in our end-of-year amount. Did staff come up with some priorities that they felt, just kind of like with the bond, we have a list of projects that come in ranking. What was on staff's mind when they thought about the excess money?
Sam, can we go back to that slide while we're talking, while we're
Yeah.
answering that by any chance?
Bill can bring us back to that slide.
Can you bring us back to that slide?
Hold, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Shut it down. It's okay. It won't take a second. So there are roughly 40,000 account codes in the district's budget. And so putting everything together, which is why we discussed the changes and leaving the entire budget the same unless we're going to talk about making some changes to the budget specifically. So we have our preliminary budget process, which talks about the changes, and then we take and cook together those 40,000 account code lines, and something will come up different. So that happened in the last, say, week and a half. So it's not something that has been discussed widely up until this point. Let's see.
Would staff be able to provide some input for the work session next Tuesday?
Yes?
Restate the input you're seeking from staff?
Well,
Please.
so when they had made requests,
Mhm.
so when they went through this process, which I understood throughout this process, that staff makes recommendations in their allocations. And my assumption is that some of those allocations weren't made because we didn't have the money. And I understand what some of the community requests are, but I'd like to understand what the priorities are from staff, sort of the things that fell off that were next on the list. I don't know to what extent it's available, but I know that when we have extra bond money, for instance, we don't restart the whole process. We look at what was determined to be a priority at that time. And I think it would just be helpful to have staff's point of view as well as we look at the different options for the excess funds. and I know excess is a strong word there, the
Extra.
funds that we might allocate if we choose not to go into a bigger reserve position, right?
I guess one thing to note is with some fairly significant leadership changes in multiple areas of the organization, a rush to fund something at this point in time is not that critical, in my opinion.
Appreciate that.
That's a great point.
Tom?
I think, Tina, what you're talking about is probably going to be part of the RFI that I'm submitting about the process and of how these budget requests came forward and what they were from cabinet, because that would flow right in there as to then how were the priorities set and what was left off.
It might be, I'm not sure. I'm not totally sure about that yet. I also wonder, do we need to include costs for a superintendent search?
There's some budget for employee searches, is that right, Bill?
Not to the extent that would be required for a superintendent search.
Okay.
But
Good point.
that's a ways into the revised budget process.
Okay.
Assuming an RFP process would be gone through to select a firm, and that would give us a dollar amount to work with and whatnot.
Right, and we also incurred some legal fees during this process too, so I just hope that we can, make sure that we have money to cover what we've been spending as we've navigated all this.
Good point.
So I've got the list, if you want to bring that up.
Oh, yeah, bring that slide back up. Is that the one you were looking for, Tina?
That was what I was looking for.
Sorry, Jenny was
Thank you,
looking for.
thank you, yes, it's helpful. Doesn't have the dollar amounts anymore, but it's helpful, yes.
Further questions, comments, board members?
Yeah.
Shelley?
I'm sure you didn't, with your statement about no rush to fund, something additional, I'm sure you weren't thinking about the dyslexic funding when you were talking about that. You were talking about other staff items, right?
Correct.
Because just what it brought to mind to me is that there actually is a rush to fund kids who won't be screened otherwise for dyslexia this fall, unless we fund that. These are kids who are going to slip through the cracks again, who are not going to be able to read. And from what I understand, if you catch these kids in kindergarten, you're talking about 10 minutes a day of structured literacy that can make a dramatic change in their life. So there is a rush to fund this. Otherwise, we're going to see a whole nother class of kids slip through the cracks.
Thanks, Shelley. Kathy?
I just want to say I share Jenny's concern about how external requests have made their way as being specific line items without following what I understood to be a process for staff approval and presentation to the board. And I think there is a process in place that I haven't seen. And when I sent an RFI on it, I didn't get any confirmation that any kind of internal process was followed for those requests. And so that makes me really uncomfortable, especially when we have other pressing needs and we're trying to balance the list that we had up there. And Shelley, to your point, while I'm very sympathetic to the dyslexia needs, we've also had pioneer parents asking for more counselors, and we've also had other communities asking for more counselors. And so we just have to balance all of that. They're all urgent needs that if we could, we would fund them all immediately. So I just think we need to be really careful about that and not just single out one group, because there are students who maybe aren't dyslexic who really could benefit from counselors. So trying to balance that out and balancing in the needs of our special needs students who also have needs that the state doesn't provide us funding for, that we have to dig into our pockets to provide those services for, is something we also need to balance. So I just think we have to be really careful and not singling out any one group over any other group of students, because we have a lot of needs out there.
So,
Thanks, Kathy. Shelley?
So Kathy, about almost 50% of our special ed kids have specific learning, reading disabilities. And so if we address dyslexia, people have told me that probably 100% of those kids are dyslexic or close to it. So if we start addressing these kids right now, we are addressing the special ed kids. And if we start addressing these kids now, these are the same kids that end up in counseling, don't graduate, require additional resources all the way through their school careers. This is the most preventative thing that we can possibly do in our school district.
Well, I agree.
And this is not 6,000 dyslexic kids, even though it is 6,000 dyslexic kids. We're talking about K through 3. This is every kid. This isn't This isn't singling out some kids and funding them and not funding others. This is every K through 3 kid that we're talking about in this program.
Well, I agree and disagree with that, but I don't think this is the place to do it. I don't think all kids who are in special ed are dyslexic. I don't think all kids who need counseling are dyslexic. I totally support doing preventive work. I totally support doing screening. I'm just suggesting that we have to balance all of these needs because we have kids who don't fit into that category whose needs are probably not being met.
Yeah, and I didn't say all. I said 47.8%, I think, of kids in special ed have reading disabilities, and probably 100% of those are dyslexic. That's what I said. So,
I have a son who's in that category, and he doesn't fit in those.
A good discussion, limited funds available and a lot of need out there. I think, well, I don't want to cut off discussion. If you have other comments first, board members. Tom?
Yeah, again, about the process. Tonight, we had an open work session associated with our community members coming forward and talking to the board about things that they would like to see in the budget. And I certainly would like to give those requests, equal footing with other requests that come in. I mean, we take the time to do that, and I believe that we need to honor those people that came forward and honor those requests, as well as the people that have come forward over the past few months discussing issues, not only dyslexia, but extra FTE in school, school counselors, social workers, so on and so forth. So it is imperative that we get these all out so we can make some sort of priority adjustment. We have a certain amount of funds. There are perhaps some things we can do to better utilize our resources, but if we don't get this in front of us, we're not able to see that.
Thanks, Tom. Kathy?
One more thing to add to that list, Tom, is the DAC priorities. Right. And I want to make sure that when we do this, that we're honoring the process that we've been really careful in setting forth to get the SAC and DAC priorities. I agree. Because I think they need to be balanced against the parents who come forward too.
Yep. So perhaps we could come back to the work session on the 30th with some dollar amounts again assigned, or would they be the same dollar amounts we've seen in the past? And then we can work backwards from the additional revenue that you've told us is now available?
So I would suggest that particularly the ongoing revenue that's available would not be sufficient to meet all of these items.
I hear you.
But if there are specifics that we can put some dollars to, certainly we can have that available. If there's, say, the next tier of that elementary social and emotional supports, what's that next tier look like and what's that cost? Textbooks, what is that? It's an RFI for 5th grade language arts. So there's a handful of items. If there are other specifics that board members have that.
Well, what I just heard would be useful. Board members, would it be useful to see a few scenarios of these allocations of funds? Tina?
Yeah, I think it would. And I understand that we have a lot of leadership in transition and retirement. If there are some, I'd like to hear from staff as well, though, if it's appropriate. And I would also like to just see what it would be like to either look at increasing the SRA, the equity funding that the union put forth, or also the social emotional funding plan that DAC put forth, because I know that we're partially funding the social emotional and counseling needs. So I would just like to see what that would cost also to expand that in its first year. Mm-hmm. So those would be two things I'm personally interested in.
Tom?
Yeah, one last item. Early along in our work sessions, we talked about class sizes, and we hear that a lot with class sizes. I put forward as a budget priority to limit class sizes for our freshmen and sophomores in core classes in language arts and mathematics to 30 students because the impact there on those classes, and we have some class sizes that are 40 or above. And what was there was basically an RFI to go out and see what that would do to our budget. And I was told, and we were told as a board, that our high school principals could make those adjustments without any impact to the budget. So it would be a zero budget impact to rearrange their schedules to give us, freshman, sophomore language arts, freshman and sophomore mathematics, such as algebra, cap those classes at about 30. And I believe we all agreed to that, and I'd like that to appear in our budget book as a budget priority so that we don't forget that going forward, and that, those principals are aware of that, and then we actually follow through on that.
Mm-hmm.
So on page 128, in the staffing allocations for high school, under the teachers, it specifically spells that out.
Yeah, there it is. One thought might be, and I turn to Kathy and Tina as the board members who helped us begin this improved development process, and I hope will help us make it even better in the next cycle, is to perhaps reach out to individual board members, work with Bill and Leslie on some different scenarios. For example, the scenario Tina would like to see. For example, they'll put in $1.2 million into dyslexia that Shelley is advocating for, so that I could, this is just one board member speaking, so I could have in front of me dollar figures assigned to the different choices that we're going to need to make, knowing that we don't have money to fund everything. What do you think of that idea?
I do think we need some structure around this, because as I'm sitting here, I am not sure what the questions are and where the concerns are. And when I hear scenarios, and we tried, apparently unsuccessfully, to try to avoid having scenarios at the last minute, because that's an unfair burden in my mind on staff. So if we could get a sense of what maybe a board member's top 2 priorities are or something, and put some structure around this so that we aren't just sending staff off saying we want to see scenarios.
Yeah, I think
That's
a good way to refine that proposal. Thank you.
Well, and just remember, we didn't anticipate any additional
Yeah.
funding money. That was not a scenario we considered.
But, so I just think prioritizing is what we need to do. And so if we can get a sense of what we're supposed to
Yeah.
give to staff, I'm fine with that.
And I understand
I'm
it.
fine with hearing what the priorities are, because that's what we're here for. I mean,
Yeah.
so but I don't have I think we're reading between the lines what Shelley's might be, but there might be something else that we
Well, yeah,
haven't
there are
brought
some
up.
other things, but, I mean, there's nothing about dyslexia that's a last-minute scenario.
No, I'm not
We've been
suggesting
talking about
it's
this
last
for 2
minute. I'm
years.
just saying with this money that has now come, how are we prioritizing in a list where that should go? And so what would our top priorities be, so that we can figure out a structure to take that, so that our next discussion, we know what that looks like. That's all I'm saying. Does that
Right,
make
well,
sense?
yeah, it does, but I would say that, we shouldn't just be looking at how to spend that $2.5 million. There's a lot of discussion and reallocation that could go on with the numbers we already have before
Well-
we got to that 2.5.
And so that's what I'm trying to figure out, is what is your scenario that you would want, because otherwise it's a little vague, so.
Well, we all have things that are not on this list, okay? I mean, at one point, we were told in the budget work session that we were not gonna have any more counselors. And then the next time we go to budget work session, we have 6 of them again. So I'm confused about how the money's moving around, even in where we're sitting there in the room talking about it. It's a different scenario every time.
So how do we just get from here to June 13th is what I'm trying to
We
figure out,
need to sit in a
Shelley.
budget work session, and we need to have consensus about what we're gonna fund. Instead of just talking about this endlessly, we need to take a vote, or we need to raise our hands, or we need to say, yes, we all agree we want this included, now let's move on to the next thing.
Well, as I remember, we did that, but what I'm trying to figure out is going forward, so Sam,
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
Yeah,
help you
and we
here.
did give, a majority of the board did give a nod of the head to the priorities that were brought in front of us. So I'm not feeling like we haven't given direction to staff. We have, but we have a little more money, and I know it's not much, but this is what we're talking about, reallocations of sort of 6-figure amounts, right? Or maybe even 5-figure amounts. So if we're going to ask Tina and Kathy for some help between now and next Tuesday, does it look like top 2 priorities? Does it look like each board member asking for one scenario they'd like modeled, like the one Tina put forth, or the investment Shelley spoke of dyslexia, class size that Tom mentioned? What feels right to the board at this point to get us to a productive work session next Tuesday? Anybody can start.
And I'm fine to receive emails with what you want. I mean, I've written down the ones that were mentioned here. if there's additional stuff, things that you're looking at, I can try to maybe work with Bill to get ready for Tuesday and then see, and again, maybe starting to look at the dollar amounts because that we have to add it all up. So, and also looking at a recommendation on how much to keep in reserve. So I'm happy to receive as many emails. I don't think we need to be limited, and then we can figure it out.
And we got to figure out a way to make all those public, the requests. So if we do it by email, we should, at the next meeting, we can list what those are of everything.
We can also
that
put
we
them in
got.
the library,
Yeah, we'll
which
put
is
them in
public.
yeah.
And the work session is
then-
public too.
And then I just think, to that point, I think that makes sense to try and get the top requests from people so that we can have some structure for the Tuesday meeting so that we all can vote on or raise our hands on what we think we need to be doing going forward.
Right. So we don't continue to.
And maybe Tina, since you've taken the notes, could you just start the list of what we've talked about today?
Feel okay? All right. Yes, Joe.
In anticipation of some of this work that you're heading into, we have asked senior staff to look at if there are scenarios here that have a budget line item associated with it. I think Bill pulled a very good example with the elementary counselors. The SEL was a 3-year rollout.
Yep.
The original proposal had a faster rollout, so it's easier for us to go to the next tier and say, here's the difference between what is in the current budget and what is a potential. So some of these lend themselves already to dollar figures, and staff's prepared to bring those forward with, in many cases, they'll take anything, but there are specific initiatives in there that did talk about a rollout plan.
Kathy.
My understanding was there's also just a timing issue with that, but I'm assuming if staff brings it forward, we could accommodate it, because what I remember is we can't, even if we had the budget, we couldn't bring on all the counselors at once because we couldn't do the professional development and everything.
Right, and I have talked to Andy Tucker about that, but in talking with her further with Sandy Ripplinger, I think, Boulder has attracted so many talented individuals that when we open up that pool, we feel pretty confident that we'll get some good applicants in there. If they're not all in place on the first day, we have the opportunity to roll it out during the course. We would certainly take care of the highest need schools first, and then roll it out in a plan that would fulfill that by as soon as possible. Yeah.
And speaking for myself, that is a scenario I would like to see, top DAC priority and priority for me as well. If we're okay with that, board members, I think we have our work. Thank you, Kathy and Tina, for helping facilitate that, and thank you, Bill, as always, for sticking with us as we try to figure out where these precious remaining dollars are going to be allocated.
I have a clarification.
Yes, Jenny.
So if you want to hear this by email, can I send it to two of you, or does that violate open meeting law? Should I just? Okay, so I can send it to both of you, okay.
We're gonna list everything tonight
Okay,
into the library.
okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and I think it's when one starts responding to multiple board members that you run afoul of the open meeting. Yes, clearly, yeah. Thank you, Counselor. Okay, so I think we have a plan there. Thank you, Bill. And I think with that, the final study item is agenda setting. We had our agenda setting meeting at 4:30 this afternoon, and I think we have a pretty clear path for the remainder of meetings between now and our July break. And of course, we are, I think, on track for budget approval by the mandated June 30th deadline. Yes. Yeah.
That's by
We better be,
statute,
yeah.
yes.
Bill has approval on June 13th.
Yes.
So we might want to anticipate that we will have a June 30th meeting at this point.
Yes, it's June 27th.
Oh, June 27th.
Yeah, and I did say at agenda setting that's probably going to happen, but hope springs eternal that we might not have to do it. So to be continued. I think with that, board members, if there's no further business, we're adjourned. And thank you, everybody.